A powerful female billionaire is brought to a complete standstill when her black card is declined in a crowded grocery store, whispers and laughter spreading as she stands humiliated under harsh fluorescent lights, until a small black boy in a worn jacket steps forward, holds out his last $4 and says softly, "I don't have much, but you can use this." $4 fall onto the counter, the room goes silent, and in that single moment her power, her pride and her entire world begin to unravel, because what she's about to learn about that child and his family will change not just her life, but the lives of thousands. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, subscribe and stay with me because what happens next is bigger than anyone expects. The January wind off Lake Michigan hit like a slap as Victoria Sterling stepped out of her black Mercedes onto the snow-dusted pavement of Franklin's Market on Chicago's South Side. Her Hermes coat, worth more than most people made in 6 months, rustled softly as she pulled it tighter. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the working-class neighborhood, a world away from her penthouse overlooking the Gold Coast. Victoria Sterling, even her name carried weight. At 42 she was the CEO of Sterling Properties, the third largest commercial real estate empire in the Midwest. 7,000 employees, a portfolio worth $3 billion, buildings that scraped the clouds in 7 states. She'd built it from the ground up after her father's death, proving every skeptic wrong, crushing every competitor who underestimated her. But today she wasn't Victoria Sterling, real estate mogul. She was just another customer at Franklin's Market, though everything about her screamed otherwise. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh glow on linoleum floors worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. Shopping carts rattled, a child cried somewhere near the cereal aisle. The intercom crackled with an announcement about a special on ground beef. It was 4:30 on a Tuesday, and the store was packed with people fresh off their shifts, factory workers, hospital orderlies, custodians, all trying to grab dinner supplies before heading home. Victoria moved through the aisles with the same purposeful stride she used in boardrooms. Her assistant had called in sick, leaving her to handle her own errands for once. It felt strange, almost primitive, to be pushing a cart herself, selecting items with her own hands. The chicken breasts, the organic arugula, though they only had regular lettuce here. The imported olive oil, except they didn't carry her brand, so she settled for something in a plastic bottle. She checked her watch, 18-karat rose gold, a gift to herself after closing the Michigan Avenue Tower deal. She had a conference call in 45 minutes, board meeting notes to review, a dinner with investors at 8. This little detour to pick up groceries, an attempt to seem normal, to connect with regular people as her therapist suggested, was already running long. At the checkout lanes, lines stretched back into the aisles. Victoria chose the shortest one, lane 7, behind a woman with 3 children clinging to her cart and a man in a factory uniform with motor oil under his fingernails. The cashier was a middle-aged woman named Brenda, according to her name tag. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The kind of person Victoria never really looked at, never really saw, just part of the machinery of daily life. Victoria's phone buzzed, a text from her CFO. The Henderson acquisition was moving forward. She smiled, thumbs flying across the screen as she typed back instructions. Buy low, sell high, show no mercy. That was the Sterling way. Next, Brenda called out, voice flat with exhaustion. Victoria pushed her cart forward, still typing. She didn't notice Brenda's slight eye roll. Didn't see the way the cashier's jaw tightened as she began scanning items without so much as a greeting. Beep, beep, beep. The chicken, the lettuce, the olive oil, a bottle of wine, some crackers. The items piled up at the end of the conveyor belt. $94.67, Brenda announced, still not making eye contact. Victoria reached into her purse, Italian leather, cost more than Brenda made in a week, and pulled out her black American Express card. No spending limit, no questions asked. She'd once bought a yacht on it just to see if the purchase would go through without a phone call. It had. She handed it over with the casual indifference of someone who'd never worried about money a day in her life. Brenda swiped it through the machine. Nothing happened. She swiped it again, this time slower, making sure the magnetic stripe made full contact. The machine beeped, not the friendly beep of approval, the harsh rejecting beep that made heads turn. Card declined. The words appeared on the small screen facing Victoria. Bright red letters, impossible letters. It's not going through, Brenda said, a hint of something satisfaction creeping into her voice. Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. That's not possible. Try it again. Brenda shrugged and swiped once more. The machine thought about it for a long moment, as if considering whether to humiliate Victoria Sterling in front of a grocery store full of strangers. Card declined. Try inserting it, Victoria said, her voice carrying that edge of command that made subordinates jump. But Brenda wasn't her subordinate. Already tried that, ma'am. Says it's declined. Brenda held the card out between two fingers like it was contaminated. Behind Victoria, the line was growing. People shifted their weight, checked their phones. A man in a bear's cap sighed audibly. That's impossible, Victoria repeated, heat rising to her cheeks. This is a black card. It doesn't have a limit. There must be something wrong with your machine. Machine works fine for everyone else. Brenda's voice had cooled several degrees. You got another card, or cash maybe. Victoria fumbled through her wallet. Another credit card, her backup platinum Visa. She thrust it toward Brenda like a weapon. Swipe. Insert. Wait. Card declined. What is happening? Victoria's voice rose, drawing more attention. Heads turned. A teenager in the next lane pulled out his phone, and Victoria caught the telltale angle. He was filming. Looks like you're broke, ma'am, Brenda said, and there was no mistaking the satisfaction now. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Here was Victoria Sterling, in her $1,000 coat and her diamond earrings, unable to pay for groceries. Happens to the best of us. Well, maybe not the best of us. Someone in line laughed. Then another person. The sound rippled backward through the crowd like a wave. Victoria's face burned. In 42 years she'd never been in this position. She'd been powerful since birth, wealthy by inheritance, and unstoppable by choice. She didn't do public humiliation. She didn't do rejection. She certainly didn't do failure. I have money, she said, hating how defensive she sounded. I have plenty of money. There's obviously some kind of mistake, perhaps a security hold. Or sure, honey. Brenda started putting Victoria's groceries aside, already looking past her to the next customer. You can step aside and call your bank. I've got other people waiting. I'm not, Victoria started, but the words died in her throat. What could she say? That she was Victoria Sterling, that she owned buildings worth hundreds of millions, that she could buy this entire store without checking her account balance. Here, in this fluorescent-lit space where everyone looked equally tired and equally eager to get home, none of that mattered. The teenager's phone was definitely recording. Tomorrow this would be online. Billionaire can't afford groceries. The thought made her stomach turn. Ma'am, you're holding up the line, Brenda said, her patience clearly exhausted. Behind Victoria, the grumbling grew louder. The man in the bear's cap stepped around her cart with an exaggerated huff. Someone muttered something about entitled rich people. Another voice said, maybe she should try working for a living. Victoria stood frozen, her groceries abandoned on the belt, her cards rejected in her hand, and for the first time since she was a child, she felt tears threatening. Not sad tears, angry tears, humiliated tears, the kind that burned behind your eyes and made your throat tight. She was reaching for her phone to call her bank, to fix this ridiculous situation, when a small voice cut through the noise. Miss, excuse me, miss. Chapter 2, The Boy with $4. The voice belonged to a child. Victoria turned, ready to dismiss whoever it was, but stopped short. He was small, 8 years old maybe. Dark skin that caught the fluorescent light, wide brown eyes that looked up at her with something she couldn't quite identify. Not pity, not amusement, something else, something pure. He wore a coat that had seen better days, navy blue, with a frayed collar and sleeves that stopped well above his wrists, like he'd grown out of it a year ago, but his family couldn't afford to replace it. His sneakers had holes near the toes, carefully covered with what looked like duct tape. His jeans were clean but patched at the knees. Behind him stood a woman and a man, both in their early 30s. The woman wore the maroon polo shirt of Sterling Properties janitorial staff. Victoria recognized it with a jolt she felt in her chest. The man wore a similar shirt, maintenance division. They both looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from double shifts and broken dreams. They were watching their son with a mixture of pride and concern. The boy held something clutched in his small fist. He stepped forward, moving past the murmuring crowd, past the teenagers still filming, past Brenda's contemptuous stare, until he stood directly in front of Victoria. "I heard you couldn't pay," he said. His voice steady despite the nervousness Victoria could see in the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I want to help." He opened his hand. 3 crumpled $1 bills, 4 quarters, 3 dimes, 2 nickels, a handful of pennies, $4.15. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. The teenager's phone stayed up, but somehow that didn't matter anymore. The fluorescent lights hummed, somewhere a shopping cart squeaked. But in that moment, in the space between this child and this woman, the whole world narrowed down to 3 crumpled bills and a handful of change. "This is all I got saved up," the boy said. His name tag, a handmade thing pinned to his coat, probably from a church event, read Marcus in crooked letters. "But my mama always says we help people when they're in trouble." "You look like you're in trouble." Victoria stared at the money, at this child, at the impossibility of what was happening. Behind Marcus, his mother's hand went to her mouth. His father's eyes glistened. They hadn't told him to do this. This was all him. "You." Victoria's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," Marcus said simply. He reached up, placed the money on the conveyor belt next to Victoria's abandoned groceries. The coins clinked against the metal. The sound seemed impossibly loud. "It's okay if it's not enough. It's all I got, but maybe it helps some." Brenda stood behind her register, frozen. The satisfaction had drained from her face, replaced by something that looked like shame. The teenager with the phone slowly lowered it. The man in the bear's cap was staring at his shoes. Victoria looked at the money. $4.15. This child's entire savings, offered to a stranger, offered to her, someone who'd probably spent more than that on her morning coffee without thinking twice. She thought of her walk-in closet full of designer clothes, most with the tags still on. Her garage with 3 cars she barely drove. Her wine cellar stocked with bottles worth thousands. Her life of excess and acquisition, and never enough. And here was a boy in a too small coat, offering her everything he had. Something broke inside Victoria Sterling. Some wall she'd built brick by brick over 42 years. Some armor she'd worn so long she'd forgotten she had it on. It cracked clean through, and for the first time since she was Marcus's age, since before her mother died, since before her father taught her that money was power and power was everything, she felt something real. She knelt down, right there on the dirty linoleum floor of Franklin's Market, in her designer coat and her $1,000 boots. She knelt until she was eye level with this child, who just taught her what it meant to be human. "What's your name?" she asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus," the boy said. "Marcus Robinson." "Marcus." Victoria tried to smile, but her face was wet. When had she started crying? "Marcus, this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." "It's only $4, Marcus said, looking confused. "It's not that much." "It's everything," Victoria said, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. "It's absolutely everything." She reached out and gently closed Marcus's fingers around his money. "But I can't take it." "But you need it," Marcus protested. The lady said. "I know what she said." Victoria glanced up at Brenda, who had the decency to look away. "But you know what? I just figured something out. I don't need groceries tonight. What I needed was to meet someone like you." She stood up, wiping her eyes, not caring about her makeup, not caring about the phones that were probably recording, not caring about anything except the weight of what had just happened. She pulled out her phone, dialed her bank. It took 30 seconds to discover that her cards had been frozen due to unusual activity. She'd bought office supplies for her assistant earlier at a store she never usually visited. A security protocol. Easily fixed. "It's resolved," she told Brenda, pulling out the black card again. This time it went through with a satisfying beep. "And I'd like to pay for their groceries too." She gestured to Marcus and his parents, whose cart held carefully selected items: the cheapest bread, store-brand peanut butter, a small container of milk, a package of chicken marked down for quick sale. "Ma'am, you don't have to," Marcus's mother started, but Victoria held up a hand. "Please," she said. "Please let me do this. It's the least," her voice broke again. "It's the very least I can do." She paid for both orders, added $100 cash that she pressed into Marcus's hand. "For your savings, since you were willing to give it all away." Then she walked out of Franklin's Market, leaving her groceries behind, not trusting herself to speak anymore. In the parking lot, she sat in her Mercedes with the engine off, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Through the store's wide windows, she could see the Robinsons checking out, Marcus holding his money like treasure, his parents talking to him with animated gestures, probably explaining what he'd done, how proud they were. Victoria watched them load their few bags into a rusted Ford sedan that had seen better days, watched them drive away into the Chicago evening, and realized she didn't even know where they lived, didn't know if they were okay, didn't know anything about the family whose son had just changed her entire life. But she knew their last name, Robinson, and she knew what she'd seen on their polo shirts. They worked for her. Chapter 3. The building nobody sees. Sterling Properties headquarters occupied 47 floors of prime downtown real estate, glass and steel and power, jutting into the Chicago skyline like a monument to ambition. Victoria had stood at the groundbreaking ceremony 15 years ago, her father's ashes barely cold, and promised she'd build something that would last forever. She'd succeeded. Sterling Properties was worth billions. It employed 7,000 people across the Midwest. It was featured in Forbes, in Fortune, in the Wall Street Journal. Victoria gave speeches about leadership and innovation and breaking glass ceilings, but she'd never once been to the basement. 3 days after the incident at Franklin's Market, Victoria stepped off the elevator on sublevel 2. The doors opened to reveal a world she'd never seen, despite owning the building it existed in. The fluorescent lights here were cheaper, harsher. The floors were concrete instead of marble. No expensive art on the walls. No fresh flowers replaced daily by a service that cost more per month than most people's rent. Just gray walls, gray floors, and the smell of industrial cleaner. A woman in a maroon polo shirt pushed a cart stacked with supplies. She glanced up at Victoria, designer suit, heels that clicked on the concrete, and quickly looked away, as if making eye contact with management might get her in trouble. "Excuse me," Victoria said. The woman jumped slightly, then turned. "Yes ma'am, I'm looking for Marcus Robinson's parents. They work in maintenance and janitorial. Do you know them?" The woman's expression shuddered. "I might. Why?" "I need to speak with them." Victoria softened her voice, trying not to sound like she was giving orders. "It's not they're not in trouble. I just need to talk to them." The woman studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to trust her. Finally, she pointed down the hallway. "Break room. Third door on the left, but their shift ends in 20 minutes, and if they're late clocking out, it gets docked from their pay." "Thank you," Victoria said, but the woman had already turned back to her cart. The break room was small, cramped, and smelled like old coffee and microwaved meals. A handful of people in maroon polo shirts sat at battered tables, eating lunches from plastic containers, looking at their phones, existing in the precious 15 minutes they had between cleaning the executive offices and servicing the parking garage. Victoria recognized Marcus's mother immediately. She sat in the corner, eating a sandwich that looked homemade, reading something on a phone with a cracked screen. Marcus's father sat next to her, eyes closed, grabbing a quick rest. When Victoria walked in, the room went silent. Everyone looked up. Everyone recognized her, even if she'd never learned their names. Marcus's mother stood slowly, her sandwich forgotten. "Miss Sterling, Mrs. Robinson." Victoria's voice was quiet. "Could I speak with you and your husband for a moment?" The fear that flickered across the woman's face cut Victoria deep. This was an employee seeing the CEO appear in her break room. Nothing good ever came from that. "We haven't done anything wrong," Mrs. Robinson said quickly. "Our work records are clean. We're never late. Please," Victoria interrupted. "You're not in trouble, I promise. I met your son at Franklin's Market 3 days ago." Understanding dawned on Mrs. Robinson's face. "Oh, that was you." Mr. Robinson's eyes opened. He stood up, protective instinct drawing him to his wife's side. "Marcus told us what happened. Said he gave his money to a lady who couldn't pay." "He did," Victoria said. Her throat felt tight. "He offered me everything he had. And I need to know." She looked around at all the watching faces, then back at the Robinsons. Could we talk somewhere private? They ended up in an unused storage room, surrounded by cleaning supplies and boxes of paper towels. Not exactly the setting Victoria had imagined, but it would do. How long have you worked here? She asked. The Robinsons exchanged glances. 6 years, Mrs. Robinson. Call me Angela, she'd said. Answered. Both of us. It's steady work. Benefits. We were lucky to get it. What do you make? If you don't mind my asking. Another exchanged glance. Mr. Robinson, Thomas, spoke up. $15 an hour. Both of us. We work 40 hours a week, sometimes more if there's overtime available. Victoria did the math in her head. $15 an hour, times 40 hours, times 2 people. $1,200 a week before taxes, maybe $1,000 after. $4,000 a month for a family of 3 to live on in Chicago, where rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood started at $1,500. Where do you live? She asked. Englewood, Angela said quietly. We know it's not the best neighborhood, but it's what we can afford. 375 square feet. Marcus sleeps in the living room, but he doesn't mind. He's a good boy. Victoria thought of her penthouse. 4,000 square feet. 3 bedrooms she never used, a kitchen where she never cooked, a view worth $500,000. Tell me about your day, she said. A typical day. Angela and Thomas looked at each other, confused by this strange conversation with their CEO in a storage closet, but they told her, wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Get Marcus ready for school. He walked the 6 blocks himself, because they had to be at work by 5:30. Their shift started before the executives arrived, cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, vacuuming floors, making everything pristine before the people who mattered showed up. 8-hour shift with 2 15-minute breaks and a 30-minute lunch. 30 minutes that Angela used to call Marcus's school, to make sure he'd arrived safely, to hear his voice, to cram a week's worth of mothering into a rushed phone call. Clock out at 2. Rush to Marcus's after-school program at the community center. $5 a day they could barely afford, but cheaper than a babysitter. Take him home, help with homework, make dinner from whatever they could stretch the furthest. Rice, beans, chicken when it was on sale. Put Marcus to bed. Lay awake worrying about bills, about the car that was making strange noises, about Marcus's shoes that were too small, and his coat that didn't fit. Do it all again the next day. We're grateful, Thomas said, as if reading disapproval in Victoria's silence. This job, it's better than what a lot of people have. We know that. Victoria nodded slowly. She was thinking about the executive bathroom on the 43rd floor. Marble countertops, gold fixtures, fresh flowers, luxurious toiletries restocked daily. She'd approved that renovation herself. Cost $90,000. She was thinking about the annual executive retreat, a weekend at a 5-star resort, team-building exercises and golf and meals that cost more per person than Angela and Thomas made in a week. She was thinking about her own salary, her bonus, her stock options, the money that piled up in accounts she barely looked at. Do you like working here? She asked. It's work, Angela said carefully. Diplomatically, the way you talk to someone who could fire you with a single word. It pays the bills. What would you do? Victoria asked slowly. If you could change anything about this job, about this company. Silence, long and uncomfortable. Finally Thomas spoke, his voice low. With respect, Miss Sterling, you don't really want to hear that. I do, Victoria said. I really truly do. Okay, Thomas straightened his shoulders. You want to know what we change? We change the fact that the people who clean this building, who make it shine, who keep it running, we can't afford to live in a safe neighborhood. We change the fact that our son walks to school alone, because we have to be here before sunrise. We change the fact that when the executives complain about the coffee not being fresh enough, someone from HR comes down here and yells at us. But when we report broken equipment that makes our jobs harder, it takes months to get fixed. Angela put a hand on his arm, but he kept going, and Victoria could see all the frustration of 6 years pouring out. We'd change the fact that you just spent God knows how much renovating the lobby, new furniture, new plants, new everything, but the break room down here has the same broken microwave we've been complaining about for 2 years. We'd change the fact that Sterling Properties has a charity gala every year where rich people pay $1,000 a plate to feel good about themselves, but the people who serve that food make $15 an hour and can't afford health insurance that actually covers anything. He stopped, breathing hard. But we're grateful, he added, and the bitterness in those words could have stripped paint. We're very grateful for this opportunity. Victoria stood very still. She felt like she'd been slapped. No worse. Slapped would have been easier to dismiss. I'm sorry, Thomas said after a moment. That was out of line. No, Victoria said. No, it wasn't. You're absolutely right. She thought about the boy in the too small coat. The boy who'd offered a stranger everything he had. The boy who was being raised by parents who worked their fingers to the bone for a company that treated them as invisible. I need to see it, she said. See what? Angela asked. All of it. The break rooms, the equipment, the conditions you work in. I need to see what I've been. She couldn't finish that sentence. What I've been ignoring, what I've been allowing, what I've been profiting from while people struggled. Miss Sterling, we really don't want to cause trouble. Angela started, but Victoria held up a hand. You're not causing trouble. I am. Or I have been. And I'm going to fix it. Over the next week, Victoria did something she'd never done in 15 years of running Sterling Properties. She looked. Chapter 4. The Education of Victoria Sterling. She started in her own building, but didn't stop there. Sterling Properties owned 47 commercial buildings across the Midwest, office towers, shopping centers, industrial parks. Each one employed dozens or hundreds of people in maintenance, janitorial services, security and facilities management. Victoria visited them all. In Indianapolis, she found a 62-year-old custodian named William working third shift in a building where the heat didn't work properly. He wore 3 layers under his uniform shirt and his hands were red and chapped from industrial cleaning solutions. How long has the heat been broken? Victoria asked. William looked nervous, like this was a trap. 6 months, ma'am, we reported it. They said it was scheduled for repair. Victoria checked the work orders on her phone. The repair request was there, flagged as low priority because it was only the service areas that were affected. The executive offices were fine. That's what mattered. She authorized the repair immediately. Emergency priority, cost $12,000. About what she'd spent on a handbag last month. In Milwaukee, she discovered that the break room microwave Thomas had mentioned wasn't an isolated incident. At a Sterling Properties shopping center, the employee break area was in a basement with water damage, mold creeping up the walls, and bathroom facilities that barely functioned. We eat lunch in our cars when it's warm enough, one woman told her. In winter we just skip lunch. Cost to renovate the space properly, $30,000, less than Victoria spent annually on fresh flowers for her office. In Detroit she learned that security guards worked 12-hour shifts with no place to sit except a folding chair they'd bought themselves. Company policy said they had to remain standing and alert. The chair was technically a violation, but their supervisor looked the other way because he knew standing for 12 hours straight wasn't reasonable. In St. Louis, she found that the cleaning crew was supposed to finish their work in 6 hours, but the building was large enough that it actually required 8 hours to do properly. So they rushed, cutting corners, or stayed late without clocking the extra time because they were afraid of being flagged for inefficiency. Every building told the same story: people working hard, people treated as invisible, people making poverty wages while generating profits for a company worth billions. Victoria returned to Chicago with notebooks full of observations, a phone full of photos, and a sick feeling in her stomach that wouldn't go away. But she also returned with doubt gnawing at her insides. What if she was wrong? What if this emotion, this guilt, was clouding her judgment? What if changing everything would destroy the company her father had started, the empire she'd built? She spent 3 sleepless nights in her penthouse, pacing between floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city she suddenly felt she didn't know at all. She pulled up spreadsheets, ran financial models, calculated and recalculated the cost of doing the right thing. The numbers terrified her. $7 million annually just for wage increases, another $3 to $5 million for facility improvements, better equipment, enhanced benefits, $10 to $12 million total, every year. Her hand hovered over her phone a dozen times, ready to call her CFO and tell him to forget the whole thing, to go back to business as usual, to stop this madness before it destroyed everything. But then she'd remember Marcus's face, the trust in his eyes, The absolute certainty that helping someone in need was just what you did. No calculations, no cost-benefit analysis, just humanity. On the fourth morning, Victoria made her decision. She called an emergency meeting of her executive team. They gathered in the conference room on the 45th floor. 10 people who'd helped her build Sterling Properties into what it was. Her CFO, COO, VP of Human Resources, heads of various divisions. People she trusted, people she'd worked with for years. We need to talk about how we treat our workers, Victoria began. The silence that followed was telling. Her CFO, Richard, 55, Stanford MBA shareholder in the company, spoke first. What do you mean? I mean the people who clean our buildings, maintain them, keep them secure. The people who make $15 an hour while we're pulling in record profits. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Victoria, we pay competitive wages. We follow all labor laws. If this is about that woman who complained about, it's not about one complaint, Victoria interrupted. It's about the fact that we've built a system where the people who do essential work can't afford to live. Where a child goes to school in a coat that doesn't fit because his parents, both of whom work full-time for this company, can't afford a new one. With respect, her VP of Human Resources said carefully, we operate on market rate compensation. If we dramatically increase wages for facilities staff, it would affect our profit margins. Our shareholders, Victoria said, her voice sharp, are doing just fine. I want to know why the people who make this company function can't afford basic necessities. Because that's how the economy works, Richard said, frustration creeping into his voice. Low-skill jobs pay low wages. It's basic economics. We're not a charity, Victoria. We're a business. Low skill. Victoria stood up, placed her palms on the conference table, leaned forward. Thomas Robinson has been maintaining our HVAC systems for 6 years. He can diagnose problems that would cost us tens of thousands if they weren't caught early. Angela Robinson knows every inch of this building, manages her time perfectly, coordinates with other shifts. Those are skills, valuable skills. Then they should negotiate for better pay, someone else offered. Use those skills as leverage. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Negotiate. They're afraid to ask for a broken microwave to be fixed. They're afraid to report unsafe conditions. They're afraid that if they speak up, they'll lose the job that's barely keeping them afloat. That's not a negotiation. That's coercion. The room fell silent. Her team looked at each other, clearly wondering if their CEO had lost her mind. What exactly are you proposing? Richard finally asked. Victoria pulled out her laptop, opened a presentation she'd worked on for 3 sleepless nights. Numbers, charts, a complete overhaul of Sterling Properties' compensation structure. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked to the first slide. Was she really doing this? Betting everything on a lesson learned from an 8-year-old boy? Yes, she was. I'm proposing we raise the minimum wage for all our employees to $22 an hour, she said. The number hit the room like a bomb. That's nearly a 50% increase, the CFO sputtered. Victoria, that's the cost would be astronomical. $7 million annually, Victoria said. I've done the math. Yes, it's a lot. It's also less than 3% of our annual revenue. Less than what we spent on executive bonuses last year. You want to cut executive bonuses? Now Richard looked genuinely alarmed. I want to redistribute wealth more equitably. I want people who work full-time to be able to afford to live. Is that really such a radical concept? It's not sustainable, her COO argued. Other companies don't do this. We'd be at a competitive disadvantage. Or Victoria countered, we'd be at a competitive advantage. Lower turnover, better morale, improved productivity, people who actually care about their work because they feel valued. Did you know our annual turnover in facilities management is 67%? Do you know how much it costs to constantly hire and train new people? It's still cheaper than raising wages across the board, Richard said flatly. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, saw the Rolex on his wrist, the custom suit, the man who drove a different luxury car every day of the week, the man who just argued that it was cheaper to churn through struggling workers than to pay them enough to live. When did we become the villains? She asked quietly. Richard blinked. What? When did we become the people who profit from others' suffering? When did we decide that our comfort mattered more than their survival? This is business, Victoria. It's not personal. It is personal. Her voice rose. It's personal to Angela Robinson, who can't afford to live in a safe neighborhood. It's personal to her son, who offered a stranger his last $4 because he'd been taught to help people in need. It's personal to every single person who works for us and wonders how they're going to pay rent this month. So you want to upend our entire business model, because a kid gave you some money. Richard's tone had cooled significantly. Victoria, I understand you had some kind of emotional experience. But some kind of emotional experience, Victoria repeated. She felt anger flaring now, burning away the last of her doubt. A child showed me more compassion in 30 seconds than I've shown in my entire life. Yes, that affected me. Yes, it changed how I see things. And if you can't understand why that matters, then maybe you're the problem. The room went very quiet. I'm implementing these changes, Victoria said, closing her laptop. Her voice was steady now, certain. Effective immediately, minimum wage across all Sterling properties increases to $22 an hour. We're renovating all employee break rooms and facilities to the same standard as executive spaces. We're hiring additional staff so people aren't overworked. We're providing real health insurance, not the bare minimum legal requirement. And we're creating pathways for advancement so that someone who starts in maintenance can work their way up if they want to. The board will never approve this, Richard warned. I control 51% of the voting shares, Victoria reminded him. The board will approve what I tell them to approve. And if anyone on this executive team has a problem with treating our workers like human beings, you're welcome to resign. I'll write you a generous recommendation letter. Nobody spoke. Good, Victoria said. Meeting adjourned. Get me updated budgets by Monday. And Richard, cancel the executive retreat to the Bahamas. We'll use that money for employee bonuses instead. She walked out, leaving her executive team in stunned silence. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was pounding. But she'd done it, and she wasn't going back. Chapter 5. The Ripple Effect. The announcement went out company-wide 3 days later. A video message from Victoria herself, explaining the new wage structure, the facility improvements, the benefits enhancements. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't make it sound like charity. This isn't generosity, she said to the camera. This is what should have been happening all along. You make this company work, you deserve to be paid accordingly. The response was overwhelming. In Chicago, Angela Robinson watched the video on her phone during her lunch break, then called her husband. Victoria could hear them crying on the phone through her office door. She'd made sure the Robinsons were in the same building that day, wanted them to hear the news directly. At $22 an hour, they'd make over $2,000 a month more. That was a new coat for Marcus, a safer neighborhood, health insurance that actually covered doctor visits, breathing room, hope. But not everyone was happy. Within a week, Victoria started receiving calls from other CEOs, people she'd networked with for years, members of the Chicago business elite. You're setting a dangerous precedent, one told her. Now our workers are asking why we don't do the same thing. Then maybe you should, Victoria suggested. This is going to hurt everyone's bottom line. Or maybe our bottom lines were built on exploitation. The calls got less friendly after that. A scathing op-ed appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Victoria Sterling's Emotional Economics. Why Feelings Don't Belong in Business. It accused her of being naive, of letting a chance encounter cloud her business judgment, of betraying shareholders for a publicity stunt. Forbes ran a piece titled, Sterling Properties, Compassion or Collapse, questioning whether the company could sustain its new wage structure. Investors called emergency meetings. Stock prices fluctuated. Analysts predicted disaster. Victoria's phone rang constantly. Her email overflowed. The pressure was immense, but she also received other messages. A letter from William in Indianapolis. I'm 62 years old. I've been working since I was 16. This is the first time I've ever felt valued. Thank you. An email from a single mother in Milwaukee. I can afford to buy my daughter new school supplies now. Real ones, not from the dollar store. She cried when she saw them. I cried too. A video that went viral, Marcus Robinson at his school, wearing a brand new winter coat, telling his classmates about the nice lady from the store, who'd learned about kindness from him. That video did something the business media's criticism couldn't. It humanized the story. Suddenly, people weren't talking about profit margins and shareholder value. They were talking about a little boy in a too small coat, and a billionaire who'd learned to see the people around her. Other companies started calling, but these calls were different. How did you structure the rollout? What were the implementation costs? How do we do something similar? A movement started small at first, but growing. Companies across the country began raising their minimum wages, not all of them, not even most, but enough to matter. Enough to show that change was possible. 3 months after the announcement, Victoria held a company-wide gathering at a rented convention center, all 7,000 employees invited. Not a requirement, but an invitation. Most came. She stood on a stage, looking out at thousands of faces. Faces she was finally learning to see. People, not resources. Humans, not expenses. 6 months ago, she said, I couldn't pay for my groceries. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The story had become legendary. And a little boy offered me everything he had. $4.15. Not because he knew who I was. Not because he expected anything in return. Just because he saw someone who needed help, and he'd been taught that you help people when they're in trouble. She found Angela and Thomas in the crowd. Marcus sat between them, swinging his legs from a chair that was too big for him, wearing that new coat even though they were indoors. Marcus Robinson taught me something that day. He taught me that wealth isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you're willing to give. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone around you. It's about building something that doesn't just extract value but creates it, for everyone. She paused, letting that sink in. Sterling Properties is changing. Not because it's good PR, not because it makes us look compassionate, but because it's right, because every single person in this room deserves dignity, deserves respect, deserves enough money to live without constant fear. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar, but Victoria wasn't finished. However, I've learned something else over these past months. Changing wages isn't enough. Better break rooms aren't enough. We need to change the whole system. Chapter 6. The investigation. Victoria's next move surprised everyone, including her own board. She hired an independent firm to conduct a comprehensive audit of Sterling Properties. Not a financial audit, those happened regularly. This was different. A culture audit. Working conditions, management practices, treatment of employees at every level. I want to know everything, she told the lead investigator, a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd spent 20 years exposing corporate malfeasance. Every complaint, every problem, every place where we're failing our people. Nothing off limits. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Most CEOs don't actually want to know this stuff. I'm not most CEOs, not anymore. The investigation took 2 months. Patricia and her team interviewed hundreds of employees, reviewed thousands of documents, observed operations at every Sterling Properties location. They went deep, and what they found was damning. The preliminary report landed on Victoria's desk on a Tuesday morning. She cleared her schedule and read all 237 pages. By page 50 she felt sick. By page 100, she was angry. By the end she was ready to burn the whole system down and start over. The wage increase had helped, but it had only scratched the surface. The real problems went deeper, woven into the very fabric of how Sterling Properties operated. There were the obvious issues: supervisors who verbally abused workers, managers who showed favoritism, safety violations that had been reported and ignored, equipment failures that put people at risk. But there were subtler problems too. A culture where admitting you didn't understand something was seen as weakness, where asking questions made you a target, where innovation from the bottom was dismissed but incompetence at the top was excused. One story in particular stuck with Victoria. A maintenance worker named James in the Detroit office had noticed a pattern of electrical issues that suggested a serious problem with the building's wiring. He'd reported it 3 times over 6 months. Each time his supervisor dismissed it. The building passed inspection. The supervisor said, "Stop trying to make yourself look important." 2 months later, an electrical fire broke out. Nobody was hurt, but the damage cost Sterling Properties $800,000 to repair. James was written up for failure to adequately communicate safety concerns. Victoria read that section twice, feeling her blood pressure rise. James had communicated. He'd done everything right. The system had failed him, then punished him for it. She called Patricia. "I want to meet him, James, and anyone else who has stories like this." That's a lot of people, Patricia warned. Then we'll need a bigger room. They set up town halls, not mandatory corporate propaganda sessions, but actual open forums. Victoria showed up, sat in the audience, not on the stage, listened to people tell their stories. In Minneapolis, a woman named Sarah described being passed over for promotion 7 times despite perfect performance reviews. Each time, the job went to a man with less experience. When she complained to HR, she was told she was being too sensitive and should focus on being a team player. In Cincinnati, a security guard named Robert explained how he'd caught someone stealing from the building, reported it properly, but was then accused of not following protocol. The thief, who turned out to be a manager's nephew, got a warning. Robert got suspended for a week without pay. In Phoenix, a custodian named Maria shared that she'd been working for Sterling Properties for 8 years but had never received a single raise until Victoria's recent wage increase. I asked once, Maria said quietly. My supervisor told me I should be grateful to have a job at all. Said there were plenty of people who would work for less. Victoria listened to story after story. Hours of testimonies, days of hearing about a system she'd built, a culture she'd allowed to flourish, a company that had treated human beings as disposable. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but her hands were shaking. I owe you all an apology, she said, not just for these specific failures, though those are inexcusable, but for building a company where this kind of thing could happen, where people felt afraid to speak up, where your concerns were dismissed, where you were treated as less than. She looked around the room, at faces that were skeptical, hopeful, angry, tired. Changing wages was a start, but we need to change everything. And I need your help to do it. Over the next month, Victoria did something unprecedented. She formed committees made up entirely of non-executive employees, maintenance workers, custodians, security guards, administrative assistants, people who actually did the work. Their task redesigned Sterling Properties from the ground up. The executives were furious. You're letting janitors dictate company policy, Richard, the CFO demanded. I'm letting the people who know the problems best solve them. Victoria corrected. You have an MBA from Stanford, that's valuable, but it doesn't teach you what it's like to work a double shift, because you can't afford to turn down overtime. It doesn't teach you what it's like to report a safety violation and be ignored. Theory is useful, experience is essential. The committees worked for 6 weeks. They came back with recommendations that were radical, practical, and brilliant. From the Facilities Committee, a new reporting system where safety concerns went directly to a third-party reviewer, bypassing supervisors, who might ignore them. A rotation system so people weren't stuck doing the same physically demanding tasks every day. Equipment upgrades purchased based on worker input, not just cost. From the Operations Committee, transparent promotion criteria, skills-based advancement paths, mentorship programs, a system where anyone could propose improvements and get real consideration, not just lip service. From the Culture Committee, anonymous feedback channels with guaranteed response times, mandatory bias training for all managers, a zero-tolerance policy for verbal abuse or favoritism with teeth. Supervisors who violated it would be demoted or fired regardless of their performance numbers. Victoria read through all the recommendations. Then she read them again. Then she called her executive team. We're implementing all of it, she said. All of it. Richard looked at the list. Some of these would require complete restructuring of our management hierarchy. I know, that's the point. Victoria, this is insane. You're letting the inmates run the asylum. Victoria stood up, placed both hands on the conference table, and looked Richard directly in the eye. Richard, you're fired. The room went silent. Excuse me, Richard's face went red. You're fired. Effective immediately. I'll have HR draw up your severance package, a generous one, because I'm not vindictive, but I will not have someone in my leadership team who refers to our employees as inmates, who sees people as obstacles to profit instead of the reason we're profitable at all. You can't. I can. I'm the majority shareholder, and I'm done pretending that your expertise matters more than basic human decency. Clear out your office. You have until end of business today. Richard stood up, his jaw clenched. You're going to regret this. This company will collapse within a year, maybe, Victoria said. Or maybe we'll build something actually worth building. Either way, I'd rather fail trying to do the right thing than succeed doing the wrong one. Richard stormed out. The remaining executives sat in stunned silence. Anyone else want to leave? Victoria asked. I'm serious. If you don't believe in what we're doing here, if you think treating people well is incompatible with running a successful business, this isn't the place for you anymore. Nobody moved. Good, Victoria said. Then let's get to work. Chapter 7. The Cost of Change. The changes weren't easy, they weren't smooth, and they definitely weren't cheap. Restructuring the management hierarchy meant some people who'd been with the company for years had to adjust to new roles or leave. The new safety protocols required significant investment in equipment and training. The transparent promotion system meant Victoria's executive team had to justify their decisions in ways they never had before. Stock prices dropped. Analysts predicted disaster. Competitors whispered that Sterling Properties was imploding. There were days when Victoria wondered if Richard had been right, if she'd let emotion cloud her judgment, if she'd sacrificed a successful company on the altar of idealism. But then she'd get an email from someone like James, the maintenance worker from Detroit, who'd been promoted to facilities manager and was now implementing the safety protocols he'd tried to advocate for years ago. Or she'd see Maria from Phoenix, who joined the culture committee and helped redesign the entire feedback system. Or she'd walk through the renovated break rooms, bright, clean, welcoming spaces with working appliances and comfortable furniture, and see people actually taking their full lunch breaks, laughing, relaxed. Small victories. But they added up. 6 months after the restructuring began, something unexpected happened. Productivity went up, not a little, a lot, across the board in every division at every property. Turns out when people feel valued, when they're not exhausted and stressed and afraid, they work better, they care more, they spot problems before they become expensive, they propose innovations instead of just following orders. The building in St. Louis where workers had been rushing through their cleaning in 6 hours, with proper staffing and realistic time expectations, the quality of maintenance improved so much that tenant satisfaction scores jumped 23%. Which led to higher retention rates, which meant more stable revenue. The Detroit office where James had been ignored about the electrical issues. Under the new safety protocol system, workers caught and fixed 3 major problems before they could become disasters, saving Sterling Properties hundreds of thousands in potential damage. The data was undeniable. Treating people well wasn't just morally right, it was good business. 9 months in, stock prices started recovering, then they started climbing. Within a year, Sterling Properties was valued higher than it had been before Victoria's changes. The analysts who'd predicted collapse started writing different headlines. Sterling Properties, the company that proved compassion and profit aren't mutually exclusive. Other CEOs called again, but now they wanted to learn, not criticize. How did you do it? What were the key factors? Can you speak at our leadership conference? Victoria said yes to some, no to others. She was picky about who she shared her experience with. She could spot the difference between someone genuinely interested in change and someone looking for good PR. But through it all, she never forgot where it started. Chapter 8. The Return to Franklin's Market. 1 year and 3 days after the incident that changed everything, Victoria walked into Franklin's Market carrying a very specific grocery list. The store looked exactly the same. Same fluorescent lights humming overhead. Same worn linoleum floors. Same tired shoppers pushing carts after long shifts. She went to lane 7. Brenda was still there scanning items with the same mechanical efficiency. But when she looked up and saw Victoria, something changed in her expression, recognition, and maybe shame. Miss Sterling, Brenda said quietly. Brenda. Victoria placed her items on the belt. The same items from a year ago. Chicken, lettuce, olive oil, wine, crackers. How are you? I'm okay. Brenda scanned the items slowly, not making eye contact. I saw the news, about your company, what you did, what I should have done all along. Brenda rang up the last item, $94.67, the exact same total. Victoria pulled out her black American Express card. This time it worked perfectly. I owe you an apology, Brenda said suddenly. Victoria looked up, surprised. What? A year ago, when your card got declined? Brenda's hands were shaking slightly. I was rude. I was mean. I enjoyed watching you struggle, and that's not okay. I've thought about it a lot. About what kind of person that made me. You were tired, Victoria said gently. Working a hard job for probably not enough money, taking frustration out on someone who seemed to have everything. I understand, that doesn't make it right. No, Victoria agreed, but I was worse. I walked through life not seeing people like you at all. You were just scenery, part of the background. I didn't think about your life, your struggles, your humanity. At least you saw me. I didn't see anyone. Brenda handed over the receipt. For what it's worth, what you're doing, really doing, not just talking about it, matters. My daughter works for one of your competitors. She saw what Sterling Properties did and asked her bosses why they couldn't do the same. They gave her some BS answer about market rates. She quit, found a better job with a company that actually values its workers. Good for her, Victoria said. She meant it. There's someone here who'd like to see you, Brenda added. Been waiting every Tuesday for the past month hoping you'd come back. Victoria turned to see Marcus standing at the end of the checkout lane, taller now at 9 years old, still wearing that coat, though it fit better now. Beside him stood Angela and Thomas, both off shift, watching with careful expressions. Marcus ran up to Victoria and wrapped his arms around her waist in a hug that nearly knocked her over. Miss Victoria, his voice was muffled against her coat. Victoria knelt down, just like she had a year ago, until they were eye level. Hi Marcus, Mama and Papa said you changed everything at their work. Is that true? I tried, Victoria said. But really you changed everything. Remember, I just gave you $4, Marcus said, looking confused. You gave me way more than that. You gave me a reason to be better. Thomas stepped forward, extending his hand. Victoria shook it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the dignity. We wanted to thank you, he said. Our lives are, we're in a new apartment now, better neighborhood. Marcus has his own room. Angela's taking online classes at night, accounting, she's brilliant with numbers. The company's paying for it, and I get home early on those nights to help Marcus with homework. You designed that program, Victoria reminded him. You and the other committee members. I just wrote the checks. You did more than that, Angela said. You listened. That's rarer than you think. They talked for 20 minutes in the parking lot. About Marcus's school, where he was thriving now that his parents could afford supplies and field trips, and all the little things that added up. About the community in their new neighborhood, where Marcus could play outside safely. About Angela's classes and how she discovered she had a real talent for numbers. About Thomas getting promoted to head of facilities maintenance. About dreams that had seemed impossible a year ago, and now felt within reach. I got something for you, Marcus said suddenly. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and handed it to Victoria. Inside was a drawing, crayon on construction paper, 2 figures holding hands, one tall in a fancy coat, one small in a blue jacket. Around them Marcus had drawn hearts and stars and the words thank you in letters that took up most of the page. For your office, Marcus said, so you remember. I could never forget, Victoria said, her voice thick. Ever. She hugged him again, and Angela and Thomas. 3 people who'd changed her life by being exactly who they were, by showing her what she'd been missing, by teaching her that wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with connection. When she got back to her car, she sat for a moment, looking at Marcus's drawing. Then she called her assistant. Cancel my afternoon meetings, she said. All of them. I have something more important to do. Chapter 9. Legacy. 2 years after a credit card declined in a grocery store, Victoria's Sterling stood in a very different kind of building. The Sterling Community Center occupied a full city block in Englewood, the neighborhood where the Robinsons used to live in a 375-square-foot apartment, where Marcus had walked to school alone because his parents had to be at work before sunrise. The center had everything: a library with thousands of books, computer labs with high-speed internet, job training programs, after-school care for kids, a medical clinic, a food pantry, meeting rooms for community organizations, a commercial kitchen where people could learn culinary skills and start catering businesses. All of it free, all of it accessible, all of it built on the simple principle that people deserve opportunities, not charity, support, not pity, a hand up, not a handout, though Victoria had learned that sometimes handouts were necessary too, and there was no shame in that. The center's dedication ceremony was today. Hundreds of people packed the main hall, community members, Sterling Properties employees, local politicians, reporters, and skeptics who'd come to see if this was real or just another rich person's vanity project. Victoria stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. She spotted Marcus in the third row, sitting between his parents. He was 10 now, taller, wearing a new coat that actually fit, though he still kept the old blue one in his closet. 2 years ago, Victoria began, I learned the most important lesson of my life from an 8-year-old boy. She told the story, all of it, the declined card, the humiliation, the $4.15, the journey that followed. She didn't sugarcoat her privilege or her previous blindness, didn't make herself the hero. Marcus didn't see a billionaire that day, she said. He saw a person in trouble, and he'd been taught by parents who had very little, that you help people when they're in trouble. That's it, that simple, that profound. She paused, gathered herself. But here's what I learned over the past 2 years. Individual kindness, while crucial, isn't enough. Marcus could give me $4, but that didn't change the system that made his family struggle. That didn't address the fact that his parents worked full-time for a company I owned and still couldn't afford a safe place to live. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Real change requires more than charity. It requires examining the structures we've built, the systems we've accepted, the ways we've allowed some people to accumulate obscene wealth while others work themselves to exhaustion and still can't make rent. A reporter in the back started typing furiously. Sterling Properties has changed, Victoria continued. Higher wages, better conditions, real pathways for advancement. But that's just one company, one drop in an ocean of inequality. This center, she gestured around the beautiful space, is part of a larger commitment. The Sterling Foundation will invest $500 million over the next 10 years in communities that have been overlooked, underfunded, and undervalued. Applause erupted, but money alone won't fix the problem. We need policy change. We need other companies to follow suit. We need to fundamentally rethink our priorities as a society. We need to ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to be? One where a child has to offer his last $4 to help a stranger, or one where everyone has enough that the question never comes up? She looked directly at Marcus. This center is named the Marcus Robinson Community Center, not the Sterling Center. Not after me. After a boy who showed more wisdom at 8 years old than I'd accumulated in 4 decades. After a family that never stopped believing in human dignity, even when the system tried to crush them. The applause was deafening now. People stood. Angela was crying. Thomas had his arm around her. Marcus looked bewildered and proud and overwhelmed all at once. When the noise died down, Victoria spoke again, quieter now. I was wrong about almost everything. I thought wealth was about accumulation. It's about distribution. I thought success was about climbing higher. It's about lifting others up. I thought power was about control. It's about service. She folded her notes, even though she'd stopped following them 10 minutes ago. A year after our encounter, I asked Marcus what he wanted to be when he grew up. You know what he said? Someone who helps people. Not a doctor or a teacher or any specific job. Just someone who helps. That's his measure of success. That's his definition of a life well lived. Victoria looked around the room one last time. We could all learn from that. We should all learn from that. I know I'm still learning, every day, and I hope I never stop. The ceremony continued with speeches from community leaders, a tour of the facilities, and a ribbon cutting that Marcus got to do. Scissors almost too big for his hands, but his smile big enough to light the whole building. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the sun set over Chicago, Victoria found herself alone in what would be the center's library. Shelves waiting to be filled with books. Tables waiting for students, a space full of potential. She heard footsteps behind her, turned to find a woman in her 60s, dressed simply, with the kind of face that had seen hardship and come through it with grace intact. Miss Sterling, I'm Helen Davis. I wanted to thank you, for what? My granddaughter works at Sterling Properties, Detroit office. She's a single mother, and before your changes, she was working 2 jobs just to keep her head above water. Now she works 1 job, makes enough to support her family, and actually gets to see her kids at night. You gave her her life back. Victoria felt the familiar sting of tears. 2 years, and she still wasn't used to hearing these stories. Hoped she never got used to them. I just did what should have been done all along, she said. Maybe Helen allowed, but you did it. That counts for something. After Helen left, Victoria stood alone in the quiet library for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she kept there. Marcus's crayon drawing, the one from the parking lot at Franklin's Market. She'd had it professionally framed. It hung in her office right behind her desk where she could see it every day. A reminder, a North Star. Her phone buzzed. A text from Angela. Marcus wants to know if you'll come to his school assembly next week. He's giving a presentation on kindness, says you're his inspiration. No pressure, but he'd love it if you could make it. Victoria typed back immediately, I'll be there. She would always be there. For Marcus, for Angela and Thomas, for every person whose life had intersected with hers in this strange, beautiful journey. Not because she was their savior, she'd learned that thinking was part of the problem, but because they'd saved her, and she owed them everything. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered against the darkening sky. Somewhere in one of those buildings, people were working late, cleaning offices, securing entrances, maintaining systems. Essential workers whose labor made everything else possible. Victoria thought about them, saw them, valued them, and promised herself for the 1000th time that she would never stop fighting for a world where everyone had enough. Where no child ever had to offer their last $4. Where kindness was the rule, not the exception. Where the measure of wealth wasn't how much you had, but how much you gave. That was the legacy she wanted to build. Not towers that scraped the sky, but communities that lifted each other up. Not profits that made shareholders rich, but systems that made life livable for everyone. It wouldn't be easy. It wasn't finished. Maybe it never would be. But it was worth trying, because a little boy in a too small coat had shown her the way, and she would follow that light for the rest of her life. Epilogue. 3 years later, 5 years after the grocery store, the email came on a Wednesday morning. Dear Miss Sterling, I hope you remember me. My name is Marcus Robinson. You probably remember me as the kid from the grocery store, but I'm 13 now, in 8th grade. I wanted to tell you something. I'm applying to high schools, and one of the essay questions asked about someone who inspired me. I wrote about you, not because of the community center, or the money, or any of that. I wrote about you because you listened. When I gave you that $4, I was scared. I thought the adults would laugh at me or tell me to go away, but you knelt down and looked at me like I mattered, like what I had to say was important, like I was a whole person, not just a kid. You still do that. Every time I see you, you ask real questions and wait for real answers. You remember things I tell you, you make me feel heard. My teacher said that's rare, said most powerful people don't do that. But you do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is thank you, not for the center or the help you gave my family, though that changed our lives. Thank you for seeing me, for seeing all of us. I want to be like that when I grow up. Someone who sees people, someone who listens, someone who helps not because it makes them feel good, but because it's the right thing to do. You taught me that it's possible. Love, Marcus. P.S. I got into my first choice high school. It has a great debate team. Mama says you'd be proud. Victoria read the email 3 times. Then she printed it and added it to a folder she kept in her desk drawer. It was full of letters like this. Stories of lives changed, families helped, hope restored. She pulled out the very first item in the folder, Marcus's crayon drawing from 3 years ago. The colors had faded slightly, but the message remained clear. 2 figures holding hands, hearts and stars. Thank you. She put the drawing back, closed the drawer, and looked at her calendar. She had a meeting with the board in an hour to discuss expanding the Sterling Foundation's reach to 5 more cities. After that, a call with other CEOs who wanted to implement similar wage structures at their companies. Then Marcus's debate team competition at 4. She wouldn't miss it for the world, because 5 years ago, a credit card had been declined in a grocery store, and a little boy had offered $4, and nothing had been the same since.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.